Hello, in today's video we're going to take a look at a few hands played by Adrian Mateos. He is one of the best players in the world, currently in 8th place on the all-time money list, and he is also the youngest player in the top 50. In the latest GG Millions tournament he had a rough time getting bluffed left and right, but was he getting bullied? We're going to find out. In the first hand he raised pocket 7s from the middle position. He can open around 20% of his range, and due to ICM situation, blockers are getting more important than playability of the hand. We can see that ace-5 off or king-7 suited are better hands here than pocket 5s or 9-8 suited. Anyway, a pair of 7s is perfectly fine to raise here. Now let's stop for a second when the action is on the button. He is by far the shortest stack at the table, so his bubble factor is pretty low, and he needs to find ways to gather some chips, because it will be hard to ladder match by folding strong hands. Here we can see that folding ace-10 suited is a clear mistake, as solver continues with this hand 100% of the time, mostly by going all-in. Johannes Straver called 8-6 of clubs from the big blind, as he should with most of suited hands, with exception of just few combos of hands like 9-3 suited or 7 deuce suited, and wheel suited aces that are nice candidates to 3-bet all-in as a bluff. Adrian c-bet for a little bit less than half of the pot, and this is the preferred play by the solver. This is a situation where the open raiser has such a big equity advantage that he can not only c-bet with the whole range, but also do it mostly with a bigger sizing. Johannes called with his gut shot and backdoor draw, and this is also fine play. On the turn, 5 of diamonds paired the board, and the big blind took the initiative and led for a very small sizing. He should have a lot more trips on this turn, and also he already folded his worst hands on the flop, and this is the most common play in GTO. Solver almost always leads with 8-6 suited. Mateos called this small bet, and we can see that this is also the only play with his hand. Against this size he should fold only a few worst hands, but it's worth mentioning that he can also raise the bet with almost 30% of his hands. After meaningless deuce on the river, Johannes put maximum pressure and overbet for almost 2 times the pot. This play isn't that crazy as it looks, and the solver sometimes takes this line, but we can see that it's the least common action, and his hands should almost always bet the river, but the solver mixes between a very small block bet and 75% of the pot. Adrian folded, and this is the standard play here. He has an awful bluff catcher because it blocks a lot of hands that might bluff in this scenario, like 7-6 or 7-8. Solver prefers to even call some ace highs instead. This hand was well played by both players, as the only play out of GTO was that huge river sizing by Johannes. Second hand we see a raise with a mystery hand from the same player on the cutoff, but I'll tell you that he has jack 10 off here. He has chip leader on his left, so he can't be too wide, but this hand is perfectly fine to open with. Adrian called with ace-10 suited, and we can see that he should be pretty tight here and fold almost 2/3 of his hands, but this one is calling every time, so let's go to the flop. Mateos checked, as he should with his whole range, and Dutch player c-bet for 1/3 of the pot. This is a little bit similar to the previous hand. Open raiser has both equity and nut advantage, and he can justify betting with a whole range, and also solver likes to bet with bigger sizing more often, but 1/3 of the pot is also okay. Adrian called, and this is also fine, but he is on top of his range and he could also raise with it sometimes. On the turn, Johannes barreled for around 3/4 of the pot, and this is preferred sizing, but we can see that with this hand solver is very specific. It always bets when holding one heart and always checks without it. There are 2 reasons for that. Having a heart blocks many continues, so it has better fold equity, and also when another heart would come on the river, his hand would be a good candidate to represent a flush. Mateos called, as he should with all his top pairs, and having nut flush draw on top of that makes it even better. River was a brick and Straver emptied the clip. Solver barrels with this hand around half of the time, but it's a tricky spot and very easy to overbluff, because he has a lot of hands without showdown value on this river, and if he bets them all, he is overbluffing by a lot. Adrian went into a deep tank and he took more than 3 minutes to make this fold. Here it wasn't the best decision. Solver isn't folding any aces and is even calling some kings against this bet. He is just too high in his range. If we go back to preflop, he should always 3-bet hands like ace-king and ace-queen, so the only better ace is ace-jack. Of course, having 10 of hearts isn't that great here because it blocks some bluffs, but it's still too strong of a hand to fold, especially against an aggressive opponent. Next hand is a little weird. It starts with Mateos opening ace-jack under the gun. He is the second shortest stack, so he should be very tight here and raise with only around 12% of hands. Ace-jack off is just too strong to fold. Action folds to the shortest stack on the cutoff, who has little more than 9 big blinds. He has king-jack off and decided to click 3-bet for half of his stack. This is a very unorthodox play and also not very good. Solver never uses this sizing and either just jams or folds. Also, his hand is just too weak to play in this situation, even when he is the shortest stack. Mateos has just too strong of a range and there are also other players left to act. Mateos was also puzzled by this weird play and finally folded, and in vacuum this is a perfectly fine fold. He has so many better hands in his very tight range. It would be a different story if he had info that the other player might go crazy with some hands as weak as king-jack off here, but it's hard to put someone on exact range in this very rare scenario, so I can say that this fold is bad. Our next hand is a little bit similar. It starts with Mateos raising with jack-10 off from the cutoff. Solver sometimes raises with this hand, and this is the absolute bottom of the range with low frequency. Adrian rarely gives up spots where he could win some chips, so this is expected, but on these late positions, if this play is good or not really depends on players behind us. If they're not 3-betting enough, this gets much better, and if they're a little bit more aggro than they should, this hand should always go to the mac. Player on the button 3-bet bluffed with king-10 off and immediately punished Adrian for a loose open. Not like he made a mistake, Solver mixes folds and raises with this combo, but against someone who might open a little bit too loose, raising it with full frequency might be a good adjustment. Adrian should 4-bet with around 40% of his range and fold the rest, and having one of the worst hands he should have here, it was a very easy fold for him. In our fifth hand we have another clash with the Dutch player. He raised king-deuce off from the button and we can see that as a chip leader he can raise almost 2/3 of hands here and that range includes all offsuit kings. Mateos called with 10-5 suited from the big blind and this is a mistake. He should continue only with around 40% of hands, mostly by jamming them, because playing post-flop out of position with wide range against chip leader who can put a lot of pressure isn't the best idea. I manually added a few combos of suited hands for him so we could better analyze this post-flop scenario. On this very wet board Mateos checked and this is fine, but we can see that he could donk bet here with around 1/3 of his range. What is also interesting is that Solver uses either very small sizing or just overbet jams the flop, mostly with very vulnerable top pairs. Johannes c-bet for 1/3 of the pot, and this is fine play with his hand. We can see that the Solver always bets with king of diamonds or hearts and checks back other combos. This is a pretty rare scenario where a player in position has an equity disadvantage against big blind, so he shouldn't c-bet that much, only around 50% of hands. Solver usually bets with smaller sizing here, but jamming all-in with few hands is also on the table. Mateos called with his bottom pair, and on this board against small sizing this is fine play. After queen of clubs on the turn, Straver barreled for around half of the pot, and Solver approves this play, taking this action most of the time. Overall, he should barrel with around 50% of hands, using mostly this sizing. Mateos folded and this is also fine, he doesn't have many worse hands than this one. Post-flop it was well played by both players, but there was a small mistake made by Adrian pre-flop where he called with a hand that he shouldn't. Maybe against some passive players it wouldn't be that bad, but it wasn't the case against an aggressive chip leader. This hand was a good example that even when he hit a pair with a low SPR, he couldn't get his hand to showdown. In our last hand, again we see Johannes raising king-8 off from the button. He can't be as wide as in previous hand because big blind is very short and also small blind has already double tap, but still he can open more than half of his hands. Adrian was the shortest stack, had only around 8 big blinds and decided to call 8-6 off. He made the same mistake as in the previous hand. This is just not a good spot to defend with such a bad hand. Solver folds more than 60% of hands here and is jamming more than calling. 8-6 off isn't even close. On the flop, Dutch player c-bet for 1 BB. This isn't a spot to c-bet with the whole range, for the same reason as in the hand before. In this spot he is very wide and big blind should be pretty tight, so he has equity disadvantage, but with his hand it's an okay play. Mateos had two very weak backdoors and decided to check raise for 2 BB. This wasn't very good play, but I guess he just wanted to win at least one pot against his menace. Johannes jammed his top pair and this was a fine play, and Adrian again was forced to fold his hand against him. To sum it up, was Mateos getting outplayed in this tournament? In my opinion, no. In most of the spots he was just on the bottom of his range when he was getting bluffed and made correct folds. Of course, he didn't play perfectly. Folding ace-10 in the second hand or calling preflop with weak hands in the last two hands were small mistakes, but not huge blunders, and it shows that even the best of the best aren't machines and can have a bad day at the office. I hope you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and see you next time. Bye!